Cougs house. The cardiac Cougs do it again. Houston holds on to win in overtime. The Players Era Invitational, 78-74. The big win over the Syracuse Orange.
You are Locked On Coogs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Coogs, the podcast about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach Parker Ainsworth. Whether you're a Houston fan or just a hater who came to stop by, or just someone who likes that thrill you get in Las Vegas at the Players Era Invitational, thank you for making Locked On Coogs your first listen postgame at the Locked On Podcast Network, the #1 sports podcast network in the world. Now, if you're like me and you just don't know what to say after that one, tell us whatever went through your head in the most PG version when Jojo Tugler got the block to send that game to overtime, because I was breathing very relieved breaths. I felt like Houston was going to win in overtime once they got there, but even that wasn't a sure thing. Houston wins 78-74 over a tough Syracuse team. I think we learned a lot more about tonight. I want to talk about the veteran leadership that was displayed in that game. I want to talk about the freshmen and the production that they did not quite have, that Houston's been falling back on them having. And then ultimately, we'll kind of get into some familiar storylines of Houston. Now we got this one. We got a crossover tomorrow on Tennessee as well. There's a football game next weekend. A lot of Houston Cougar content coming your way. I want to make sure that we're getting it all covered the best that we can. But we got to start this game by talking about Houston's big pair of seniors. I guess really the trio of seniors. On offense, Uzan and Sharp combined for 52 of the 78 points. And it really felt like when they needed a basket, they ran. It was kind of an Iverson cut to get Sharp to the wing, and then they looped Uzan through. And if Sharp was not open on the wing, he went back through the loop as well. And they essentially let those two guys go to work for large stretches of this game when they needed baskets. That led to some possessions that were empty, where they got to the end of a shot clock, deep heave, hoping for an offensive rebound kind of situation. It also, however, led to those two guys both getting 26 points apiece on 16 field goals apiece. Emanuel Sharp, I was most impressed in this game, the way he got to the line. He was 11-12 from the free throw line, and his nickname has forever been Crash in the program. If you're around the guys, they call him a lot. Because defensively, he throws his body around like recklessly abandoned, just like doesn't care if it hurts or whatever, right? In this instance, Crash felt like he was throwing his body at the rim. Like, they're going to foul me. I'm going to, and I kind of worried about, look, the big talk of his offseason was that Emanuel Sharp lost some weight. In this game, I think it kind of dispelled the idea that he was going to be any less physical as a lighter version of himself. Sharp was really, really impressive in the stretch. He had 5 quick points in overtime in a way that kind of felt like it was going to put the game away. And then he had a deep heat check 3 that, if that had gone in, probably would have put the game away early in overtime. Milos Uzan opened up overtime with a nice drive and layup. He had a couple free throws down the stretch as well that iced it. His 3-point shooting in the first half kept it close. Frankly, Uzan finished 4 of 8 from behind the arc. And for what they're playing in Uzan's hometown. So there's got to be some good vibes going on there. Similarly, veteran Jojo Tugler, the returning starter junior, I should say, big fella, he had trouble staying on the floor in this one, foul trouble, and that's a normal story for him. But he did have those 5 blocks, 4 in the first half and the 1 at the very end of regulation. Tugler only had 4 rebounds, but I think that speaks more to the physicality of the game around him for stretches, as well as, honestly, the amount of minutes he played in this game. I got him down for 24 minutes in an overtime game. I think that speaks to the lack of availability, right, with foul trouble and stuff like that. Khalifa Sacco, I think, played okay in his spot. I comment on Twitter, and people disagree with me, that I felt like 90% of what Sacco was doing was actually really, really strong. And the other 10% was just not. And I think people thought that ratio might be a little off. But Sacco, I think, is supposed to be this agent of big guy chaos. And I think he came and did that very, very well. He had just 2 points, but he had 7 rebounds and a steal. And really, I think had a lot of deterrence at the rim. Now, neither one of those guys was, able to guard out in space. I think the big thing for Syracuse was they were able to put their big guys offensively out in space and kind of hurt Houston in a number of ways. That and then the big Kyle the third was guy's first name, William Kyle. He was an aggressive athlete. The thing that reminded me of like a Houston Cougar type of athlete, the way he was so aggressive on the boards at 6'8", 6'9", and athletic, big, lean, kind of strong, big man. And he had a great day, and Houston let that guy have a big day. He athletically was able to go around Sacco in a lot of ways, and he did not get in the same foul trouble that Tugler did. I think Tugler won his matchups when they were both on the floor, but William Kyle, they was still on the floor longer, and that proved to be a driving force in what was the near Syracuse victory. Now, I mentioned those older guys, and I want to stress that a big part of this for me was almost relief in seeing those guys come through. Because at Auburn, the story was the young guys. And in the early part of the season, I felt like we're trying to bring the young guys along and get them adjusted in these kind of warm up, tune up, kind of getting better at certain things kinds of games against the Riders and the Oaklands and those kind of guys, right? Lehigh. Then you get to Auburn, and it's all about the young guys. And today it comes back to the veterans. And I don't know if that's because they've been in this little event before a year ago. If it's, that, Auburn may have felt more like a road environment and a neutral environment is different. Or I don't, maybe the freshmen thought it was going to come as easily because they kind of had some big moments that felt like it, was going to come easy after the Auburn game. Whatever the case may be, I think it was interesting that at the post game, the immediate on the floor, Kelvin Sampson talking to cameras moments, they asked him, what he, thought of his team after the fact or something like that. And he said, it looked like we'd been here before. Like we looked like we'd been in. Well, I think that there was a stretch of like 2 minutes and 55 of those last 3 minutes of regulation that looked like a team had not held on to a lead before. I do think he had some. That's an actually pretty sharp point about once the game got tight and got to overtime. I mean, to get to overtime, they had a big block at the end of regulation. They got to overtime, opened up with a bucket, and frankly had. I mentioned that 5 of the 7 were Emanuel Sharp, but they had 7 quick points to start overtime. Felt like they just were in rhythm, ready to roll, right? And so all that I think is to say that experience apparently played a big factor. Joel says amazing block here in the live chat on YouTube. Christy says that we need games like this so it helps you grow. I think that's a big part of why they play these things, not just the money, but that also you get some benefit because you also get a buy game against or whatever, right, on TV. These events specifically help. Super H-Town Swag, I think I said that right, has troubles with the perimeter defense of our bigs, but Shredder points out it was a fun game, lots of learning. I always rather learn after a big time win. Danny Gutierrez says, holy smokes, wanted to leave the den at 1:30, and they came back. Cardiac Cougs, man, cardiologist would like a word. I'm sure that things like message boards, and I try to stay off message boards. That's not my cup of tea or anything like that. I try not to dabble in all that. I know that some people really love that. Message boards, I'm sure, are going crazy with execution here, deep three there. What are we still doing this there? Whatever. Because frankly, message boards went crazy after they beat top 25 Auburn a week ago in Birmingham, I'm sure, and all of that. Now, I want to get to one actual thing I thought was interesting about this game that was not a positive. I'm typically the most positive guy in your Houston Cougar content areas. But I want to talk about that in just 1 second because first today's show is brought to you by our buddies over at FanDuel. The NBA is back. If you can't tell, there's no better place to get on the action than FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. College basketball is in full swing. College football is wrapping up, getting into bowl season. The NFL is heading towards playoffs. There's no better time to be watching sports, and FanDuel makes all that action even more exciting. If you miss the start of a game or want to get the hot hand, FanDuel's live bets on everything from who will score next to big fourth quarter comebacks. You can combine your live bets and same-game parlays for shots at a big payout. If you thought this one was going to be close, for instance, yesterday the FanDuel line was up to 12.5. You could have gotten in easy on this game on the action at FanDuel. It keeps every game exciting where their team is making a late push. Right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 back in bonus bets for first $5 bet hits. Head to FanDuel.com, sign up today, and place your game with FanDuel, official betting partner of the NBA. NBA. Parker Ainsworth locked on Cougs here. And look, this one's interesting to me for some reason. We mentioned the veterans stepping up. Obviously, Jojo Tugler defensively. I want more out of him offensively, but defensively, he was a big presence in this basketball game. Offensively, Sharp, Uzan combined for 52 of your 78 points. I mean, that's so much you can ask for out of your returning backcourt from a team that was 65 seconds away from a national title, right? I mean, that's big time. I was interested or intrigued, I'm not sure which, about the lack of offensive production from a couple of freshmen. I want to say a couple because I want to give a highlight to one guy here. Kingston Flemings had 3 turnovers, which felt uncharacteristic. I actually thought I had him down for a 4th, but the book has him down at 3, so I'm going to give him 3. Kingston didn't look rushed or out of control. I think he didn't shoot the ball particularly well. He has 311 here. I don't think I can remember off the top of my head a questionable shot. There was 1 3 he pulled a quick trigger on that I was like, hey, I typically like to see you, especially at that point in the game, like hit a couple shots before you get to that shot because it was like quick trigger on an early shot clock 3. But generally speaking, not a bad shot for him, right? And so that's probably the only critique I had from that kind of a standpoint. But he had 9 points. He had 6 rebounds, 6 assists, and 3 turnovers. And that felt more like a freshman than we'd seen at Auburn. Cenac had 12 rebounds, had his 8 points, but was struggling defensively in a way that frankly led to him not ending up on the floor down the stretch. And, he did hit his 1-3. Right before that, he had great turnaround on the baseline that I thought was in. But Cenac, we talked about that Auburn game, Cenac and Flemings combined for 40 points in that one, where Houston also scored in the 70s. Those guys combined for more than half the points. In this one, they were the freshmen that needed help from the upperclassmen. Now, Isaiah Harwell, who has been fascinating to watch this season, is clearly still coming through some stuff, still developing, still working through injury recovery. He also has been sick, which does not help. I have a weird theory, and I'm going to keep watching this all year long, that like when he sits for long stretches, his first 30 seconds in the game takes him like he has to like warm back up almost. But I'm still a theory. It's still a theory. We're testing it out. He played 24 really good minutes, I thought. Now, he only had 2 points. He had a couple of rebounds, including the rebound that we thought was going to win the game until he missed a free throw at the end. I don't know. I was really impressed by a guy that moving is clearly still so difficult for him to come in and have an impactful day like that, right? Where he had that strongest showing, right? I thought was good on the defensive end because frankly, when you give me his injury history, the things he was good at in high school, and frankly, the fact that he's a freshman, I would have assumed throwing his body around defensively like he did tonight would have been much slower and harder. Really, really impressed by him. His freshman teammates, his cohorts, his co-class of 2025 members, I think right now feel like they just need to get the ball in the basket. Cenac, I thought this was a game where he could have had a dominant defensive performance. Instead, there were moments where I didn't feel like he could be on the floor from a foot speed perspective defensively. And I think that that's not quite the norm. Houston will have plenty of games where they rely on him defensively. We saw the same thing, frankly, not to make both top 10 projected and top 10 past picks the same guy. Jarris had moments like this too, though. Jarris Walker, top 10 pick, 2023, 5-star coming in. Everyone knew he was one and done. A lot like Chris. Jarris had moments early in his college career that Sampson had to pull him aside and say, "What are you bleeping doing?" and sit him down and those kind of things. If anything, it feels like a luxury of this team. They've got some depth around them to where they don't have to necessarily play him second away. Like that team with Jarris, the front court was Reggie Chaney, a really young JVR, Juwan Roberts, and Jarris Walker. And that really young JVR was a fouling night. I mean, you think JoJo's bad. Reggie was a defensive juggernaut, offensive. He dunked the ball. And J1 never came off the floor. So you kind of had to have Jairus on the floor a lot in that season. This season, we don't have that with Chris. So you're going to have these nights where, like, in the closing minutes and things like that, he's not out there as much. And I trust Sampson with it. And frankly, like, we should all just trust Sampson with it, right? He's the future Hall of Famer. He's the, 800 plus wins, all that, right? Well, multi-time conference coach of the year and all that kind of stuff. But it was interesting to see actually play out. Now, as far as other young guys, like Chase McCarty is not technically a freshman. He's a redshirt freshman, but he feels like it sometimes. Mercy Miller is a true sophomore, but missed. He just won the rotation a whole lot last year, right? So they're coming along as well. I thought it was interesting. So both guys, I thought Chase and Mercy had trouble guarding in space in this game, and Syracuse looked to space Houston out, right? I thought that it was interesting that Houston went to them and held on to them for a second on the floor, almost as a way to say, like, can you give us any offense? Because when Chase and Mercy came in the first half, Houston was at kind of a scoring drought and was like, hey, we need a basket. Here's these two guys. And that'll be an interesting trend to watch over the course of the season is now where these two guys go, or is that these two guys' job, right, as the season continues to play on. I do think that's a good spot for them. I also think, for what it's worth, that frankly you're going to get better games out of Chris throughout the year, and it might not matter. I'd imagine as Houston plays Tennessee tomorrow, and Chris gets read the riot act a little bit tonight, you're probably going to see a much better version of Chris tomorrow. Cenac's going to have a big kind of day, I'd imagine. Frankly, with all the struggles that we're quote unquote talking about, I think that's really because of the standard he's set, right? He did have 12 rebounds and he was 3 of 7 from the field, made a 3. Like that's really a very graded curve, or curve grade. Anyway, all that, right? So as I look at Houston in this game and think about like the veterans versus the young guys and the back and forth that is, I don't think I'm concerned or anything like that. And frankly, I'm encouraged to see the veteran guys come back. If anything, I'm mostly encouraged that Houston did it a different way. Another close game, the second one in 7 days for Houston, or whatever it's been, 9 days, whatever it is. 8 days. 8 days, that's the number. Second close game in 8 days for Houston. And they won it. They won them both in different ways, and they were both in not home for Tita environments, right? And so I think that's a good thing. Now, Tennessee proves to be a tougher opponent tomorrow, and so there's one thing that Houston's got to kind of work out of their system and kind of work through and stop, and so we'll see how they get to that in just 1 second. Parker Ainsworth, Locked On Coogs here. Houston wins 78-74. We're covering here at Locked On Coogs, part of Locked On Podcast Network, the one sports podcast network in the world. And look, I had my problems, and I was very open about them on Twitter, and not that Twitter is the world. If you don't follow me on Twitter, I was very openly talking about them on Twitter that I had problems with the officiating tonight. Not because you couldn't have called it a really tight game and let some of these fouls happen, or a really loose game and some of these fouls not happen. It did not feel like the three folks were in the same ballpark. And I fully admit that there were moments in this game that Houston probably benefited from the three officials not being on the same page as far as like level of appropriate physicality, right? But also, with the way Houston plays, they're always going to benefit from a looser whistle, right? Someone that is not blowing it very often or whatever, like that is going to help Houston every time. And that was certainly not this game, right? Not the way this game was going to go. Between the two teams, make sure I got my numbers right here. The two teams combined for 44 fouls called. And they never really, except for one play, got to the more intentionally fouling part of the basketball game, right? And so, for whatever that's worth, that was not going to go. A game that was had in the 40s on fouls. Even if it went to overtime, over 40 fouls called, and it was not going to be going Houston's way. Now, I will point out that part of what makes Houston Houston and part of what makes Sampson Sampson is finding ways to win anyways, right? Finding ways to rise above that, work through that, figure things out, right? On the whole, Houston came ready to roll, came ready to go. And truthfully, I think impressed with the resolve of, okay, Jojo's out, Sacco's in, let's roll, right? Oh, hey, Chris is having trouble guarding out his hands. Next guy's in, let's roll, right? Harwell's in, let's go. Like that kind of basketball was, I thought, an impressive thing from this team. I think honestly, part of it was that Sharp and Uzan were able to stay on the floor. We remember a year ago, Houston. While people may think that the sky is falling for Houston, and it's like, oh, okay, yes, they beat Syracuse and Auburn, but as Rowdy Coogs here points out, those two teams can't make free throws. And so what does that really, whatever, right? Rowdy Coogs, I guess, did say elite free throw defense. Sure, right? I do think it's important to point out that at this point last year, Houston was finishing this week at 4-3 and would ultimately finish the season 35-5 and was 65 seconds away from a national title and being 36-4. And one of those four, one of the only ones they lost after November, was a 1-point loss in overtime at home, right? Like things can shift and turn out. Last year, if you remember, though, at this point, the guy we had struggles with keeping on the floor was actually Milos Uzan. In elevating his defense to play at the Houston level, he's getting over the top physical, drawing dumb fouls. And so while Houston's having trouble with Jojo Tugler and keeping him in the game with foul trouble, there's a part of me that's almost relieved that it's just Jojo Tugler and not him and Milos and Kingston and a bunch of other guys, right? I will say that there were multiple times that I said four little words under my breath that I cannot say on this program. It's a family-friendly program. When Jojo Tugler made fouls on the perimeter in this game, he's too good an athlete and too veteran a basketball player to be making those still. I don't want to sit here and make excuses for that. He knows that. They know that. I do think, I think it was Beard, Casey Beard, the Houston staff. I can't remember who I heard say it one time. They're like, you only want to coach so much of that stuff out of a guy like Jojo. And I think they were talking about out of a guy like Jojo. And the understanding, if I'm paraphrasing here, was that because some of that aggression is ultimately the same thing that they have in them that makes them who they are, right? You don't want to coach Jojo to be completely not aggressive because then you don't get the block at the end of a regulation to force overtime. You got to kind of walk a fine line there. And so I think Houston's willing to take good with bad in a lot of these cases if the bad, air quotes, is being hyper aggressive. Now, are there dumb fouls you can't take, like a moving screen at the top of the key as Milos Uzan is kind of casually dribbling across? Yes, that's a dumb foul. I don't think it was a foul, but you can't be close in that situation. And Jojo took his fifth foul. He missed a little dunker spot floater with his left hand, and out of frustration, just went up and tried to swing at the rebound. Well, that swing missed, and he hit them in the face, and that's a foul, right? Like those kinds of things are frustrating at a very high level. But I also think that the aggression that leads to swatting at the rebound is the same aggression that led to swatting at the block at the end of regulation, and that's how you won the basketball game. So I see what Beard was, again, I'm paraphrasing what Beard said. It's been a couple years now. It was when Jojo was a freshman. So I guess that is 2 years. I see the argument. I just look at this, I'm like, man, like he's old enough to know better than that. And frankly, as we talk about the veteran leadership of this basketball program and this team, there were several guys that thought that had strong moments and strong games on the older side of things. I still had a player or two here. It's like, okay, you're older than that. You get that. Like, I love the heat check three from Emanuel Sharp. He was not quite set. He's on the left wing. He's deep. He's hit 2 in a row. He's like, if this thing goes in, we win the game. But I also think that, like, Sharp is smart enough to know, like, it was early shot clock. You probably get the ball. Like, we're trying to get Emanuel Sharp the ball. He probably gets it back if he gets it up there, right? And so I think that as much as I like the aggression of those plays, we are a smarter team than that. I know, I didn't text anybody or anything like that. The game just ended. I know they're going to be breaking things down and getting better after this week. Part of the benefit of this week is not just the NIL dollars, although that is a big part, but you get high-level competition several days in a row. You get a bunch of it to go back and break down before you get to conference play, right? And so Houston beat Syracuse 78-74. Pretty strong performance on the whole. Offense left some to be desired outside of a couple guys, but I think they'll get that kind of thing fixed. Now, I know there will be naysayers online. They'll talk about who was and wasn't available for Syracuse. And they'll talk about the health and this and that of whatever. And, that truthfully, Syracuse shot 26% from three-point line. And they typically shoot more like 30, and how they shot 30, they might have won that game or whatever. Would also point out that Jojo Tugler had a great plus minus, and he wasn't able to play because of fouls. In other games, he might get to play more with, depending on the referee crew. I'd also point out, too, Houston went up 11 with 3 minutes to go and missed a few shots on the stretch. It would have probably iced this thing earlier than it did, end up getting iced. So 6-1, half dozen the other as far as those kinds of guessing game things go, right? Again, I have learned a long time ago to not be worried about Sampson teams in November. It is still November, last time I checked. And so I'm not going to be worried about a close win. I'd always rather learn from a close win than a pretty loss or whatever those things may be. So that's what we got on this one. We'll be breaking down Houston, or talking through, I should say, Houston and Tennessee as well very, very shortly. So make sure you get subscribed to the best know when that thing goes live. Baylor, Houston football, a rivalry in the making, ? Next weekend, we'll be breaking that down somewhere soon as well. So make sure you subscribe and hit the bell so you know all those things go live. Thanks to the folks that tuned in live for the post game after Houston beat Syracuse 78-74 in overtime, the Players Era Invitational in Las Vegas. Locked On Coogs, primarily the Locked On Podcast Network, is your team every day, the #1 sports podcast network in the world. Go Coogs.